You know, when we think about absolute power, it often feels like, well, like something from the history books, doesn't it?
Uh-huh.
But right now, in Russia, there's a figure who wields just immense authority and operates with a level of secrecy that's, frankly, quite remarkable.
That's Vladimir Putin, of course.
Right. And his journey, I mean, from his beginnings in the KGB,
Right.
when the Soviet Union was, visibly coming apart, to where he is now right at the heart of the Kremlin, it's really defined by this sharp intellect, sure, but also these persistent allegations of corruption and just this relentless ambition.
Some people even call him a modern warlord, maybe the last of these great and terrible czars, in a way.
It's a powerful image. And what's really striking is just how far his influence reaches. He hasn't just reshaped Russia itself.
No.
He's actively worked to sort of indoctrinate the population with a certain political view. And his approach to Russia's neighbors often looks very much like, well, imperial intentions.
And he deals with global rivals with that same kind of intensity.
So our aim today really is to try and peel back some of those layers, get past the propaganda, the bravado, and understand the actual truths of Putin's life and how he managed this incredible rise.
It's a story that involves, well, huge ambition, definitely allegations of corruption, a deep sense of national pride, and this very specific global vision he seems to have.
Understanding all that feels pretty key to grasping why he does what he does. So let's start right at the beginning. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, born October 7th, 1952, in Leningrad.
Yeah, a city just deeply scarred by the war, by the siege, and his own family history was, steeped in tragedy even before he arrived.
Both parents survived the siege, survived the war against Nazi Germany, but just barely.
That's barely. His mother almost died of starvation during the siege. His father came back with terrible shrapnel wounds in his legs, lifelong pain from that.
And he lost siblings he never even knew.
That's right, 2 older brothers. Victor died as an infant during the siege, diphtheria, starvation, buried in a mass grave, though there are some other accounts suggesting maybe an orphanage. And another brother, Albert, died even earlier, back in the 30s, also in infancy.
Just devastating loss.
And it wasn't just his immediate family. 5 of his 6 paternal uncles died during the war. Putin himself talked about how his father, still recovering himself, nursed his mother back to health after the war. She was 41 when Vladimir was finally born.
Wow. That backdrop of just constant loss, but also resilience. It must have shaped his early outlook profoundly.
Absolutely. And growing up then in the shadow of all that devastation, while his early years were tough, even his birth wasn't straightforward. High infant mortality, chaotic delivery wards.
And they lived in near poverty, sharing a flax, basically a communal apartment space.
Right, with 2 other families, a makeshift kitchen for everyone. But interestingly, they weren't completely destitute. They had a TV, a telephone, even access to a dacha, a country house.
Which was unusual for that level of poverty, wasn't it?
It was. His father worked in a factory. His mother had these tough manual labor jobs, janitor, baker. So Vladimir was often left on his own.
Unsupervised.
A lot. And this mix of hardship, but also, having some access to things in the Soviet system, maybe that gave him an early lesson in power dynamics, how resources work.
Yeah, possibly. And being left alone, kept out of preschool apparently because of disease fears.
And the strict discipline there, yeah. He ended up drawn to the courtyard, to the rougher crowd there.
He was small for his age, got bullied a lot.
But it seems he almost preferred that company, the sort of thugs and drunks in the courtyard, to being home alone in their small apartment.
So that environment forced him to adapt, didn't it? To learn to fight back.
It really seems like a crucial formative time. It built that toughness, that self-reliance.
And that's when he started martial arts, Sambo and judo.
Exactly, from a young age. And judo especially stuck with him his whole life. A childhood friend later said he'd do anything to win, bite, scratch, fight bigger kids.
A real win-at-all-cost mentality, even then.
Seems like it. He joined a local street gang, and he later said that taught him a vital lesson. If a fight's unavoidable, you strike first.
But he still had to deal with school, right? Where those street rules didn't exactly apply.
No, and that caused friction. There's that story about his shop teacher literally dragging him around classrooms because he was being so disruptive.
And classmates remembered him having this real temper, holding on to grudges for hours.
Yeah, that intensity. It suggests deep emotions that maybe didn't fit the school mold. It's also telling that he was initially the only kid in his school barred from the Young Pioneers.
The communist version of the Scouts.
Right. He himself later called his younger self a hooligan, A real thug.
But that didn't last forever, did it? Around 13, things shifted.
They did. 6th grade, his grades improved, he got into the Young Pioneers, even got elected class chairman. It shows a real capacity to adapt, maybe seeing the advantages of, well, playing the game sometimes.
And he started getting interested in ideology, reading Marx and Lenin.
Yeah, suggests an intellectual side may be emerging or being allowed to emerge, but the fighting didn't completely stop. Classmates remembered him, even at 15 or 16, using Juno throws on older drunks who were causing trouble. Even took down a younger kid just playing tag once.
Huh. And this is also when the spy thing started.
Right around then, yeah. He doubled down on the martial arts, adopted this self-styled intelligence officer's work ethic, started hunting down books and films about the KGB.
And the portrait of Jan Berzin.
The founder of Soviet military intelligence, yeah. Kept it at the family dacha. It really shows where his ambitions were heading, even overshadowing the whole cosmonaut dream that was so big then.
So he was serious. Did he actually approach the KGB?
He did. Even before finishing school, he went to the KGB office in Leningrad. And the advice he got, get a law degree.
Interesting. So law was seen as the path in.
Apparently. And somehow, despite his mixed school record, he got into Leningrad State University, a top institution.
Was it just the entrance exams, or did the KGB maybe nudge things along?
It's a bit unclear. The exams mattered more than transcripts, but KGB interest is definitely a possibility. They might have already spotted him.
So, 1970, he starts law school. He knew languages already.
English and German, yeah. Useful skills. And he had a car during university.
Which was incredibly rare.
Extremely rare. A lottery win his parents got. They gave it to him instead of selling it for a better apartment. Shows a lot of support, maybe.
And at university, what was he like?
Kept a pretty low profile, apparently. Studied hard, joined the Communist Party, which was pretty standard for law students aiming for a state career. Wrote his thesis, graduated in '75.
Joining the party sounds like a pragmatic move for someone with his ambitions.
Very likely. He seemed focused, like someone with a long-term plan already in mind.
And the KGB did recruit him after graduation.
They did, picked him out from over 100 graduates. The recruiter's notes mentioned him being energetic, adaptable, brave, and really good at connecting with people quickly. Key skills for intelligence work.
So he made a good impression. Where did they send him first?
Back to Leningrad initially, doing internal intelligence work. And he did well enough to get a place at the KGB's Central Intelligence Academy for a year.
Which was a big deal.
A huge deal, usually reserved for people with top party connections or seen as having exceptional potential. It shows they saw something in him early on.
And he had ambitions within the KGB. Big ones.
Oh, yeah. He told biographers later he wanted the kind of power key KGB figures held. He was fascinated by how one intelligence officer could supposedly shape the fate of millions more than an army could.
But the reality of the job at first wasn't quite like that.
Not at all. He ended up being what he called a pencil pusher, writing endless reports that mostly went nowhere.
Bureaucracy.
Exactly. In an organization obsessed with any tiny sign of trouble, his job was basically just watching. Sentinel duty, a real letdown compared to his ambitions.
Must have been frustrating.
Probably. He even described his time at officer school later as entirely unremarkable. Then he got assigned to counterintelligence back in Leningrad.
More excitement there.
Not really. Few foreign embassies, not many major intelligence targets, so 4.5 years of relative monotony.
But something significant did happen personally during that time.
Yes, that's when he met Ludmila Alexandrova Okretnaya. She was a flight attendant.
And it took a while.
It did. They courted for over 3 years, which was pretty long by Soviet standards. And they married when he was 31, also considered relatively late then.
Does that suggest anything? Maybe cautious about personal stuff?
Maybe. Or just not very focused on it. By all accounts, including his own and hers, he wasn't exactly Mr. Romantic. Not great at communication.
Really?
Masha Gessen wrote about Ludmila's description of his marriage proposal, basically, a failure to communicate. He apparently talked himself down so much she thought he was breaking up with her, then suddenly proposed.
That's awkward.
Gives you a glimpse into his interpersonal style, maybe. Not much outward emotion, perhaps a bit transactional.
Okay, so then in 1984, things change. He gets a chance to go to the proper spy school.
Yes, the one for training agents for the kind of high-stakes stuff he'd dreamed about. And he seemed really committed, showed up for training in three-piece suits, even when it was hot.
Trying to make an impression.
Definitely demonstrating ideological commitment. But he wasn't perfect. An instructor noted he had a lowered sense of danger, maybe a leftover from his youth, and found him a bit closed off, unsociable.
But good at German.
Very good, which was noted. Despite the mixed review, he finished the course, even got appointed class foreman.
So with the German skills, a posting in Germany seemed likely. But where?
That was the crucial question. West Germany meant real spycraft, intrigue, risk, much better pay. What he wanted.
And East Germany.
Much less glamorous. Firmly under Soviet control, fewer real intelligence opportunities than even Leningrad. Basically a backwater posting.
He got sent to
Dresden. East Germany must have been a massive disappointment.
Yeah, you can imagine. So what did he actually do in Dresden?
Not a whole lot, it seems. Officially, he was trying to cultivate assets, mostly foreign students, to get intel on U.S. and NATO bases in West Germany, a place he probably wouldn't even be sent.
Were his recruitment attempts successful?
Largely unsuccessful by most accounts. And personally, this seems to have been a low point for him.
How so?
He stopped exercising, gained weight, seemed more focused on just family life, appeared kind of depressed. A lot of his spy work apparently involved just getting hold of little consumer goods from the West for himself.
So personal decline linked to professional stagnation.
Looks that way. Turning inwards, maybe just resigned to the situation. And all this was happening as the Soviet Union itself was starting to unravel.
Gorbachev's reforms, perestroika, glasnost.
Yeah, starting the same year, Putin arrived in Dresden. And he, like many in the KGB, saw these reforms as dismantling everything they believed in.
And the KGB felt powerless.
Pretty much. They were loyalists, believers in the Soviet vision, and here was Gorbachev loosening control, reaching out west, rejecting basic tenets. Putin himself, unlike his younger self, didn't fight back, just seemed stuck, probably feeling the sense of dread about it all.
Though some writers, like Catherine Belton, suggest he might have been involved in some secret KGB stuff in Dresden, preparing for a transition.
Belton suggests that in Putin's people, yes, but it's not widely substantiated. What we do know is when protests really kicked off in Dresden, Putin wasn't out there trying to crush them.
He saw the Stasi headquarters get stormed.
Watched it happen, yeah. Called it bewildering. But then the crowd turned towards the local KGB building.
And he was there.
One of the few personnel inside. And his reaction wasn't confrontation. He tried to de-escalate, even claimed he was just an interpreter when people confronted him.
Sure, I called for backup.
Called the military, but got told Moscow hadn't decided what to do yet. He was on his own for hours.
Doing what?
Burning documents. Stuffed them into a small wood stove until it actually cracked from the heat.
Wow. That must have left an impression.
A huge one. He said later, reflecting on it, I realized that the Soviet Union was ill. It was a fatal disease called paralysis, a paralysis of power.
That paralysis of power, a key moment for him seems like, seeing the state just unable to respond.
It really seems to have shaken his faith in the system, maybe solidified a desire for stronger, more decisive leadership in the future.
So after Dresden, he goes back to Leningrad.
Back to Leningrad, back into his parents' apartment, back to his old, uninspiring job. But the city itself had changed dramatically.
How so?
Dissidents were out in the open, protesting, challenging the government. The whole atmosphere was different. Putin's role had to shift too. No more hunting secret dissidents.
So what did he do?
He focused on navigating this new reality, building his own influence, protecting his allies. He didn't stay in the formal KGB structure long. He went back to Leningrad State University.
His old university. Doing what?
Officially fostering foreign academic ties. Student exchange is a pretty standard thing for KGB guys to do, keeping connections. But he wasn't there along either.
Because he connected with Anatoly Sobchak.
Exactly.
Oh.
Sobchak, the law professor, big pro-democracy figure, soon to be mayor of the city, which got renamed St. Petersburg. This was his pivot into politics.
And how do they actually meet? Are there different stories?
There are. The official version, Sobchak's version, and then Masha Gessen's theory.
Which is?
That Sobchak specifically sought out Putin because of his KGB background, saw him as a useful link to a different kind of power, something the idealistic Democrats maybe lacked.
That makes a kind of cynical sense. Putin seemed quiet, worldly, connected.
Exactly, and kept any ambition well hidden. When he asked to leave the KGB, they apparently agreed. There's no formal record of him resigning.
He claimed blackmail later.
He did. Said that's why he left in '90. But no resignation letter has ever surfaced. It adds another layer of murkiness to his separation from the agency.
Okay, so then 1991 happens, the coup attempt against Gorbachev.
Right, the hardliners trying to turn back the clock. It failed, but it totally changed the power dynamic. Boris Yeltsin emerged as the main figure.
And when the Soviet Union dissolved, Yeltsin became president of Russia.
Correct. And back in St. Petersburg, Sobchak became mayor, and Putin became his deputy mayor for international relations, his first real political job.
Was he implicated at all in that failed coup?
There were allegations later from Marina Saleh, a pro-democracy leader. She claimed Putin had diverted food supplies meant for St. Petersburg to Moscow, maybe to help the coup plotters.
Were those allegations taken seriously?
Mostly dismissed by senior figures in the post-Soviet government. As deputy mayor, Putin really cultivated this image, unemotional, calm, unflappable.
And he got involved in regulating casinos.
Yeah, pushed hard for a state monopoly, apparently, even if it meant bending laws he thought were unjust. But Marina Saleh kept raising red flags.
About what, specifically?
She alleged really dubious contracts, exporting natural resources, supposedly in exchange for food for the city. But she claimed Putin picked the partners directly, documents were missing signatures and seals, the food never showed up, and kickbacks went back to the city.
That sounds like serious corruption.
Very serious. But when Saleh took it to Mayor Sobchak and tried to get Putin fired,
Nothing happened.
nothing happened to Putin. Instead, Saleh's committee investigating him got dissolved. She kept speaking out, but lacked the platform.
Meanwhile, Putin's influence was growing.
Rapidly. He got control over international trade through the city, tied private businesses to the administration and himself. He used his old KGB contacts, now in the new FSB, built ties with organized crime figures.
Controlled media access?
Yep, rewarded loyalists with juicy assets, the beginnings of the oligarch class, really. He was building this network with himself at the center, based on mutual benefit and maybe a bit of implied threat.
But things weren't going great for Mayor Sobchak.
No, his popularity slid as the 90s wore on. St. Petersburg's economy lagged. By his 96 re-election campaign, things looked shaky. Putin, though, stayed mostly out of the direct line of fire.
And there were attacks on Sobchak's campaign manager.
2 attacks, yes. Then Putin took over managing the campaign, and he wasn't harmed. Interesting timing.
Sobchak lost the election.
He did. And Putin, showing loyalty, turned down a job offer from the new mayor.
So off to Moscow then.
Off to Moscow. Took a job as deputy head of the Presidential Property Management Office. Not very visible, but huge access to resources, people.
And he helped Sobchak when he got sick.
Yes. When Sobchak fell ill back in Moscow under slightly suspicious circumstances, Putin intervened, got him to a trusted doctor, helped him get to Paris for treatment and safety.
And while in Moscow, Putin got a PhD.
Wrote and defended a dissertation in economics, yes. Though later analysis found huge chunks of it were plagiarized from an American textbook.
Huh. Dr. Putin. Did that help him climb the ladder?
Maybe. He definitely used his connections, got a big promotion in the civil service from Yeltsin himself, first-class active state counselor like a general or admiral.
And deputy chief of the presidential staff.
May 1998. Right near the top decision makers, but still behind the scenes. But that didn't last long.
Because just 2 months later,
July 98, he's appointed director of the FSB, the Federal Security Service.
back to his roots in a way. Head of the KGB's successor, that's massive power.
Huge power, though it wasn't a totally smooth start. He walked into mass dismissals. His rank wasn't high enough for some generals. His Sobchak connection raised eyebrows.
But he did Yeltsin's bidding. The hatchet man.
Dismissed about 2,000 agents, yeah. Showed his loyalty. Brought in his own guys from St. Petersburg, insisted on staying a civilian director, not taking a general's rank, and basically got the FSB aligned with what Yeltsin wanted.
What were his priorities as FSB chief?
Economic security was big, building ties with the new oligarchs, setting up financial surveillance, also tackling extremism, terrorism, protecting state secrets, getting into internet surveillance.
Did he see the '98 financial crash coming?
Reports suggest he saw early signs and took steps to insulate some key wealth holders. Primakov, the PM then, got the credit for the recovery, but Putin definitely benefited from the connections and control he built.
Wasn't there a scandal involving FSB officers? Assassination plots?
Yes, he inherited that.
Yeah.
5 officers claimed they'd been ordered to kill an oligarch. Putin was apparently annoyed they went public, but he handled it by moving the guy who supposedly gave the order, not firing him.
Keeping things quiet, avoiding making enemies.
Seems to be the pattern. Though the whistleblower who led that group, Alexander Litvinenko, well, he later died of polonium poisoning in London.
Right. And Putin's relationship with Prime Minister Primakov soured.
It did. Disagreements over FSB personnel, over investigating liberal politicians, and Yeltsin kept siding with Putin.
There was a sex scandal involving Primakov's friend.
Yes, and some suggest Putin fanned the flames of Yeltsin's suspicions about that. Plus, after a Jewish Democratic leader was shot in St. Petersburg, Putin oversaw a really fast investigation, which impressed Yeltsin.
So Yeltsin was losing faith in Primakov, worried he might run for president himself.
Exactly. So Yeltsin fired Primakov in April '99, just before an impeachment vote against Yeltsin was due.
And the search for Yeltsin's successor began in earnest. Who was on the list?
Names like Nemtsov, Yavlinsky, Ivanov, Aksinenko were floated. Putin was mentioned as an interesting idea.
Yeltsin was in a tough spot by then, wasn't he? Bad health, low popularity, allies deserting him, maybe fearing prosecution after leaving office.
Definitely under siege. And Putin offered what Yeltsin needed. Loyalty, a low profile, but known to be a savvy, discreet operator.
Plus, he had that connection with Berezovsky, the oligarch.
A key connection. Putin had impressed Berezovsky years before by refusing a bribe in St. Petersburg. They had a relationship of trust.
So Berezovsky reached out to Putin.
In July '99, while Putin was on holiday in France, got Putin to agree he'd be open to being successor, but only if Yeltsin asked him personally.
And Yeltsin met Putin. For the first time.
Apparently so. Berezovsky recalled Yeltsin's first impression was just, seems all right, but he's kind of small.
Huh. But Yeltsin's private writings show more thought.
Yeah, he was impressed by Putin's St. Petersburg record, how he handled rivalries in Moscow, his toughness, his FSB competence, his foreign policy experience.
So Putin ticked the boxes for Yeltsin. A compromise candidate, acceptable to most factions, could maybe beat Primakov?
Pretty much. The point wasn't a perfect ideological match, it was broad appeal. As Masha Gessen put it, lots of people could project what they wanted onto this gray, ordinary man.
And in August '99, he's confirmed as prime minister.
With wide Duma support, Yeltsin then publicly names him successor, and Putin agrees to run for president.
But nobody really took him seriously at first. He was seen as a nobody, a puppet.
Widely underestimated, yeah. Expected to be another short-lived PM, but almost immediately he started acting assertively.
Also,
His first TV interview as PM, he threatened striking workers with jail time, then quickly authorized airstrikes in Chechnya, raised soldiers' pay there, centralized military command for the Caucasus.
and used the violence in neighboring Dagestan.
Yeah, Russian forces hit Dagestan hard within weeks, civilian casualties too. It seemed part of a bigger strategy, projecting strength.
Which then ties into the apartment bombings, starting just weeks after he became PM.
August 31st, 1999. A series of 5 explosions across Russia, Moscow included. Over 300 dead, hundreds injured. Devastating.
And immediately blamed on Chechens.
Officially, yes. Chechen militants under Shamil Basayev. It created this huge climate of fear, obviously. Perfect for a leader promising tough action.
But then came Ryazan.
September 22nd. An off-duty bus driver spots suspicious activity. They find a bomb in the basement sacks marked sugar, but containing hexogen, military explosive.
And the people planning it weren't Chechen.
The driver described them as European Russians. One made a dodgy call to FSB HQ. Police detained 2 suspects later. They had FSB ID and were released.
That looks incredibly suspicious. FSB planting bombs.
It raised massive questions. The official story crumbled fast. Then, over a day later, the FSB claims it was just a training exercise with a dummy bomb, and the detector malfunctioned.
The training exercise, after finding real explosives and FSB agents involved.
Nobody bought it. And adding to the weirdness, the Speaker of the Duma had announced one of the bombings 3 days before it actually happened.
Log how?
Exactly. It just fueled the cover-up suspicions. Now, it's crucial to say, later analysis, expert opinions, especially in the West, have questioned if the FSB was really behind all the bombings or any.
But at the time...
At the time, the public reaction was huge skepticism. The FSB explanation just stank of a cover-up, as people said. The press hammered the Yeltsin administration, and Putin got dragged in by association.
Yet there was no big uprising. Putin actually gained support.
Surprisingly, yes. His handling of the Second Chechen War, which ramped up after the bombings, was seen as efficient, decisive. Yeltsin's ratings kept falling, but Putin's started soaring.
From unknown to popular contender, just like that.
It was incredibly fast. Yeltsin started stepping back, sending Putin to summits instead of going himself. Told Bill Clinton he thought Putin would be the next president.
Which surprised the U.S.
Apparently, yeah. They weren't aware he was being groomed. Yeltsin also got his campaign people working for Putin, set up the Unity Party. Governors, oligarchs piled in to support him.
And Putin leaned into the tough guy image with Chechnya.
Definitely. Showed that street-side defender of the Russian people against terrorists. By late October 99, polls showed him as the frontrunner. Just 2 months before, he was at 2%.
Incredible turnaround. So Yeltsin decided to resign early to make Putin acting president.
That was the plan. Give him the advantage of incumbency for the 2000 election. Putin apparently resisted at first, but Yeltsin insisted.
And on New Year's Eve, 99.
Yeltsin gives that farewell address. Regrets, asking forgiveness. End of an era. Putin becomes acting president.
And one of his first acts grants Yeltsin immunity.
With the very same pen Yeltsin used to name him successor, reportedly, signed a decree giving Yeltsin sweeping immunity from prosecution.
Did Yeltsin know that was coming?
Apparently not. He viewed it with suspicion. And to outsiders, it looked like the whole thing might have been partly arranged to protect them both legally.
So, as acting president, what did Putin do?
Moved fast, reshuffled the government, laid out his policy plans, kept overseeing Chechnya, sidelined political enemies, and old Yeltsin loyalists.
Brought in his own people.
Lots of his St. Petersburg allies got top jobs. Dmitry Medvedev, for instance.
And the campaign image. Strong, vigorous.
Calm, in control, unbothered. There was that highly publicized trip to Chechnya on New Year's Eve, the day he took over, spent it with the troops, broadcast live.
And the fighter jet photo op.
Right, a couple of months later. Flying co-pilot in an Su-27, claiming he even took the controls briefly. Image building.
What about his policy platform?
Bold statements. Criticized communism's failures, but promised a unique Russian path, not Soviet, not Western. Restore Russia as a great power, counterbalance the U.S.
Did we see any personality?
Glimpses. Seemed to lack a big ego, wasn't into bragging about power, showed a sort of dry Russian humor sometimes.
But there was controversy, too. Sobchak came back.
Anatoly Sobchak, returned from Paris, agreed to help the campaign. But he caused problems, calling Putin the new Stalin, contradicting the main message.
And then Sobchak died suddenly.
February 2000, just weeks before the election, during a trip to Kaliningrad. Officially a heart attack, but lots of suspicious stuff around it.
Like what?
Reports at 2 different autopsies, his bodyguards apparently had poisoning symptoms. A journalist investigating his death had his car blown up. It looked murky.
But the campaign rolled on, like a freight train.
Pretty much unstoppable by then. Little doubt about the outcome. The Chechen War was in its final phases, Grozny captured.
International reaction shifted, from criticism to dialogue.
Gradually, yes. More pragmatic engagement. Madeleine Albright, U.S. Secretary of State then, met him and was apparently surprised by his confidence, how prepared he seemed.
So, Election Day, March 26, 2000.
High turnout. Putin wins decisively. 53.4% of the vote.
Who was second?
The communist leader, Zyuganov, got just under 30%. International observers mostly called it fair and free.
And Putin's reaction.
At his election HQ that night, he seemed almost deferential, surprised to even be part of it all. Reportedly wouldn't even take Yeltsin's congratulatory phone call that evening.
Interesting. And what happened to Marina Sully, the politician who'd accused him of corruption back in St. Petersburg?
She tried to organize some opposition after his win, met with an old ally, Sergei Yankov, but something in that meeting scared her so badly she fled the city, went into hiding in the countryside, died there in 2012.
And Yankov.
He was shot and killed in 2002.
So quite a journey we've traced today, from that really difficult childhood in post-war Leningrad right up to the presidency of Russia.
Yeah, and what really jumps out are those unexpected twists, the key moments that shaped his path. You know, the street life, the shifting interests that determined focus on the KGB, and then how he just navigated the chaos of post-Soviet politics.
Absolutely. He's such a complex figure, even just looking at these early years, full of contradictions, it seems. The bullied kid learning to fight, the judo player fascinated by spies, the disciplined KGB man becoming this shrewd political operator.
It really wasn't a straight line at all. And exploring all this, his formative years, his early career, it naturally makes you wonder, doesn't it? How did those early challenges, the way he adapted, the ambitions he clearly developed, how did all that lay the groundwork for what came later, for his long-term vision for Russia?
It's a crucial question. And maybe for you listening, what parts of his early life seem most telling? What clues do you see about the leader he would eventually become?